And really that brings us up to our first talk by Thompson, Morrison, and Thompson is going to be talking about learning and reimagining education. So welcome, Thompson.
Thank you very much, Philip. Yeah, I'm going to walk through a little bit of a story. And this story begins back with the Technology Association of Oregon. And back around 2010 or so, we were really defining our story here in Oregon that was allowing our software industry to accelerate at rates that it had never seen before. One of the great challenges that we were having, though, however, was that we didn't have the people, and we were having to do a lot of efforts to bring people into this area. We all know that we are in a time of a very, very different culture from the industrial age. We know that we're in a time in which some people call it the innovation economy, a creative economy. We know that this is a fundamentally different time than we had even 10, 20 years ago. The great challenge, however, is that we don't have the people for that help us in our companies. And so, here in Oregon, we've had to spend a lot of efforts to bring people here. So through the foundation of the TAO, we began an initiative. And this initiative was to reimagine how we as an industry could partner with our schools and our greater economy to help empower and create an inclusive innovation-based economy here in Oregon. And we knew that this required an audacious aspiration. We knew that this was not about an incremental change in how we do things. Because here in Oregon, for instance, when we started this initiative, we had the 45th worst graduation rates in the entire country. We knew that if we just did everything as we made incremental changes, we would simply continue to fall further behind. In fact, we are now 48th in the country. We are said to be the Mississippi of the West, except Mississippi actually has higher graduation rates than here in Oregon. So if we're going to go and build a strong, sustainable economy here, we have got to recognize that how we educate and empower the next generation that will come into our companies is absolutely essential for us. And that we cannot do incremental changes, we must leapfrog. We must be bold and reimagine. When we talk about an innovation economy, we must realize that there's also multiple aspects of that. There is the infrastructure that you need for that economy. And that infrastructure is primarily the internet infrastructure. And you must have the talent. You must have the community and the businesses, which all relate and work together to build an inclusive innovation economy. So this is not a simple task. This is a very integrated one. So when we look at that talent piece, this is where we have to go through a huge paradigm shift. Because what happened is that when we, as industry people, started walking into the classrooms and into our schools, we were shocked. Because what we walked into was a culture so different from the culture in which we operate in that we felt completely as if we were from Mars. Because what happened when we walked into our classrooms is the classrooms were no different from when we were students. And in fact, they were no different than when our parents were students. That the world in which our next generation is being educated is fundamentally based upon a model from an industrial economy to create industrial workers. It's a production line. It's a production line that defined an output, defined a set of knowledge, and created a sequential processing of students to converge on a common set of knowledge and converge on a common set of thinking that was appropriate for an industrial age. But we don't live in an industrial age anymore. That's not what our economy is going toward. we live in an economy that is driven by innovation. Our companies need creative problem solvers. We need not convergent thinking, but divergent thinking. We need confidence and courage. And that's where this huge disconnect begins to happen, because that's not what is being empowered and taught within our schools. And so we have to recognize that this is a huge cultural issue that if we don't address, that our economy will continue to be undermined. But in order to do that, we have to think about what does that educational environment look like? What does it? Because, quite frankly, our educators don't know. Our educators know that there's a problem, know that there's a crisis, but they are completely clueless as how to solve it because they only know education. They don't know our world. Most educators have spent their entire life within the realm of education, and they don't understand us and our world. So it's up to us to go in and begin to understand and engage with them, to help them learn our world and us to learn their world and come together. But to do that, we have to recognize what does the core of that seed, that kernel of the innovation economy all about? Well, the industrial economy was made up of four primary pedestals: resource, service, agriculture, and manufacturing. What's put in there is something called the creative industries now. And that creative industries has really been empowered by the new technologies. The new digital technologies has empowered a new creative industries that have allowed this new ability to solve problems in new ways. And when you look at that new creative industry is computer-based, and that computer-based is dependent upon software, and software is what has led us to the cultural change around Agile. Agile is a lot more than a framework, a lot more than practices. It is a mindset. It's a complete cultural paradigm that is different from the paradigm of the previous generation. So if we're going to think about education, we have to think about it within that paradigm. So we started this process working with a high school up in Portland, where we went in as industry people and began to kind of bring our culture of learning, fast, iterative learning cycles that we have within our Agile cultures, and began to apply that to the learning within the schools by simply solving problems. We would go in and ask the students, what problems do you want to solve? Let's go solve them together. Let's figure out how to do that. But as we did that, we began to see the students become ignited. Because many students in today's high schools don't know why they're there. They don't know why they're showing up. There's a small percentage of students who are good, compliant learners, and they will do what they are told to do the tests. The vast majority of students don't know really why they're even showing up every day. But what happened in Portland, as we started to do that, is that as we saw the students become really excited, we saw the administrators becoming really confused. They didn't know what to do with us. We didn't fit within their model in their structure. So they kind of tried to shunt us to the side and said, well, maybe you can do the after-school stuff for those kids. And this is not about those kids. This is about all kids. And we knew that we had to go into the core culture of learning to really have an impact. So we were invited around that time down to a place called Dayton, Oregon. Dayton, Oregon, community of about 2,500 folks in Yamhill County. 2/3 of the students there live in poverty. About a third of it is Hispanic. It's an agricultural community that's, in many ways, struggling. It's a community that is proud. It's a community with a history. It was a community in which used to be the threshold for the entire Willamina Valley. The Willamina produce used to flow through Dayton on its way up to Portland. And they are the Pirates. And they have won multiple state championships, and they are proud. But they also recognize that as a rural community, they are struggling. So we said, what would happen if we came in and partnered with you and reimagined not only the school, but the entire community? So we helped bring in the fastest internet network on the entire West Coast, a 10 gig fiber network to Dayton. And we said, we are going to then also work with you to reimagine the learning experience. And we recognize when we talk about Agile, there are 3 dimensions of that: the mindset, the skill sets, and the tool sets. It has to be that profound understanding of comprehensive paradigm shift into a new way of learning. What happened to kick this off is I was invited down to actually teach a class, 6 weeks, required class for juniors. That meant we had the kids who were thriving and the kids who were struggling. I walked into this environment and I said, we need to do something audacious. We have 6 weeks to do it. I don't know what we're going to do, but we have to do it. And we have to prove something. I asked them, how many of them knew how to program? Nobody had ever done any programming. How many of them had mobile phones? And they all pulled out mobile phones. How many would you like to do something with their mobile phone? And they all said, that would be cool. Okay, 6 weeks. We got to prototype a mobile app. Let's find a problem in the community that you want to solve. Let's figure out how to design that and prototype that. In 6 weeks, the superintendent's going to come in and she's going to go, and you have to present to the superintendent your prototype of that mobile app. There's only one catch here. I don't know how to program. So you guys are going to have to teach yourself how to do this. And we jumped in. And we jumped in together as a community. Because there's a lot of online resources, okay? And what happened is, as we did that, we began to find kids working at different rates. Those kids were responsible for teaching the others. If you had a problem, you knew who to ask. It was a community of learning. But what really struck me when I went into that community, when I went into the school and actually got into that classroom, was the mindset of the teachers toward their students, a typical mindset. And I realized they're looking at their classroom like a bell curve. That means that in their class, they have 4 or 5 smart kids that they're trying to keep busy and occupied and challenged. They've got 4 or 5 kids who are the troublemakers. And then they have the middle of the curve. And all they're trying to do is to make sure they manage the edge and incrementally push forward the middle. And that's their entire day. And I said, in order for us to do this, we have to think differently, because that's not our world. We don't live by the bell curve anymore. That's an industrial model. We live by the power curve. Moore's law, power curve. Reed's law, power curve. Cooney's law, power curve. Our entire world is defined by exponentially increasing rate of change. It also means that when we go into a classroom and into an environment, we recognize that we all are needing to work together to solve that problem together. And so if we're going to solve that, we're going to deliver that in 6 weeks, we all have to be in, and we all have to do it, and I don't care what the labels are that you might be carrying in or the labels the teachers might be putting on you, we've got to solve this. And they knew that I was real. And 6 weeks later, they presented their prototypes of mobile apps. Now, after the presentation of these, I said, let me share with you, I was mostly talking to the administrators and the teachers there. I said, let me share with you what I was doing, making this up. I'd never done this before. But what I was trying to do, because this is how it works within my world. And that is that we iterate fast. We have fast, short learning cycles. We call them sprints. But what happens is that we learn, we create, back and forth. And we do that as fast as we can. And that's what I was doing with your students. 3 days a week they had to learn how to code. 2 days a week they were working with their teams to solve that problem. It had to be purpose. There had to be a purpose to drive that, to focus that. It had to be team, because everybody had to be a part of that. There had to be urgency. You had to be willing to pivot. And everybody, including the teacher, were co-learners. Well, the principal saw that and said, I want that everywhere. Can you do that in math? Is that possible to do that in math? Is that possible to do that in history? Is this just about technology? I said, no. This is how we learn. 3 weeks later, we spun up a sprint in the math class in trig. I taught conic sections. I don't even know what a conic section is. They learned it. But we had to solve a problem using trig. And they did it. Well, we began to realize, as this began to change the entire culture of that school, that mindset of Agile had to be, we had to find out how could we introduce that to the other schools in that area. Because the idea of Dayton was that it was going to become a positive deviant. It was going to be something that people would be curious about. So we created something called a Makeathon. And we began to hold Makeathons around the area in different schools to begin to introduce this idea of Agile learning. We said to a community, give us 60 people, 20 students, 20 teachers, 20 administrators from the community. They have to know nothing about programming, nothing about circuit design. They've got a 2 to 3 hour boot camp, and after break for lunch, they've got to go solve a problem. And we've done this now about 15 times around that region and other parts of the state. And the teachers and the administrators say, I had no idea. I had no idea that these students could learn this way. They can actually learn faster than they can be taught. And that's the key. And then we started introducing skill sets. The skill sets of how do you start thinking? How do you use concepts of design thinking to understand empathy and design that works towards solutions? We work with Stanford's design school and bring that training in through a program called School Retool with a partner of ours called Construct. We then introduce tool sets, our tool sets of Agile. We start saying, these are the tools that we use for this. And then we tell the story. We tell the story about Dayton. We tell the story of other communities that are beginning to be empowered by these tool sets, mindsets, and skill sets of innovation that unleashes new possibility and new opportunity for these rural communities. Because when you start telling it, people begin to realize this is real. This is not just theory, it is practice. Practice makes reality. We practice this in every day we do this. And then what happens? Other schools began to be interested. And other schools said, what's going on in Dayton? Come, let's watch. And now all of a sudden, now we've got a whole group of schools over in Central Oregon now that are also going down this path. A critical piece of all of this is creating what we call the ecotone. An ecotone is when two ecological systems overlap. When they overlap, it creates stress. Think of a river flowing into the ocean. Tidal waves, tidal currents pull it back up, fresh water comes back down, it creates a sense of tension. That tension actually is the basis by which we adapt. The right amount of tension is important. We live in one world, educators live in another world. What we are doing is to create the ecotone between our world and their world so that we can be creative together. A part of that, a critical part of this is as teachers have begun to say, I want to follow this path, I want more of this, but I don't know how to. How do I actually do this when I've got 30 kids? How do I do this? So we started a pilot program. And this pilot program with New Relic was one that came out of a talk I gave there last spring. It was to their senior project managers, and I just told the story of what we were doing. Afterwards, several of them came up to me and said, how can we be a part of this? How can we help? And I said, I don't know. And then I thought, what is the part that scares me the most? And I realized that a reason why this really worked in Dayton is because of a personal commitment that I had made to the principal there. And the commitment was simply this. Every week, Thursday morning, 7:15, I'm going to be on a hangout. I'll meet you there. For 3.5 years, Jamie and I have met every Thursday morning at 7:15 while school's in session. And we just simply talk. She tells me about her stuff, I tell her about her. What happens is that we begin to share language. We begin to share concepts. We begin to share experiences. And that allows her to walk back into her classroom and back into her school with a different idea, a different model, some different ideas. And then she comes back and she has also given me ideas that I carry back into my company. And my question that I've always been most fearful about is this. As it begins to take off, and if that piece of that conversation is so important, what happens when it needs to scale? Because I can't scale. I can't do that with 5 schools. I can't do that with 10 schools. But is this unique to me and Jamie, or is this something bigger? Is this something inherent of a relationship? So that was what the pilot was. These New Relic folks came up. I said, look, this is my problem. Would you be willing to pilot this? We started with 5 New Relic engineers, paired them with 5 teachers in Dayton, and said, do a liftoff once a week, meet, talk for 6 weeks, just agree to meet for 30 minutes over a hangout. What might happen? And what happened completely blew us away. In that period of time, profound, authentic relationships were built that allowed and empowered both sides to do their own work better. So what we're doing now is we're rolling that program out. Gradually, we're bringing Newberg on board. And we're expanding this at New Relic. This is part of what we're doing here, is being this bridge between our 2 worlds. Because we're at this inflection point. We can go one of 2 ways. We're either going to make this work and work together, or it's not. And we have to recognize that in order to do this, we all have to be a part of the story. Because this is where learning really happens, is when we all are learning together. So thank you very much. If you're interested in hearing more about what we're doing, you can just leave a message at the URL or contact me through LinkedIn. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Thompson.